Let's look at some Conan drawings. Just stuff you can find on the web. Arnold. That one's pretty cool. Alright, let's do some reading. Chrome. Gah. Five. What do I know of cultured ways, the guilt, the craft, and the lie? I, who was born in a naked land and bred in the open sky, the subtle tongue, the sophist guile. They fail when the broadswords sing. Rush in and die, dogs. I was a man before I was a king. The road of kings. Hey, I'd better put on my glasses. God damn it. Through the silence which shrouded the corridor of the royal palace stole 20 furtive figures. Their stealthy feet, bare or cased in soft leather, made no sound either on thick carpet or bare marble tile. The torches which stood in niches along the halls gleamed red on dagger, sword, and keen-edged axe. "Easy all," hissed Escalante. "Stop that cursed loud breathing. Whoever it is, the officer of the night guard has removed most of the sentries from these halls and made the rest drunk. But we must be careful just the same. Back! Here comes the guard!" They crowded back behind a cluster of carven pillars, and almost immediately 10 giants in black armor swung by at a measured pace. Their faces showed doubt as they glanced at the officer who was leading them away from their post of duty. This officer was rather pale as the guard passed the hiding places of the conspirators. He was seen to wipe the sweat from his brow with a shaky hand. He was young, and this betrayal of a king did not come easy to him. He mentally cursed the vainglorious extravagance which had put him in debt to the moneylenders and made him a pawn of scheming politicians. The guardsmen clanked by and disappeared up the corridor. "Good," grinned Escalante. "Conan sleeps unguarded. Haste! If they catch us killing him, we're undone. But few men will espouse the cause of a dead king." "Aye, haste!" cried Ronaldo, his blue eyes matching the gleam of the sword he swung above his head. "My blade is thirsty. I hear the gathering of the vultures. On!" They hurried down the corridor with reckless speed and stopped before a gilded door which bore the royal dragon symbol of Aquilonia. "Grommel!" snapped Escalante. "Break me this door open." The giant drew a deep breath and launched his mighty frame against the panels, which groaned and bent at the impact. Again he crouched and plunged. With a snapping of bolts and a rending crash of wood, the door splintered and burst inward. "In!" roared Escalante, on fire with the spirit of the deed. "In!" yelled Ronaldo. "Death to the tyrant!" They stopped short. Conan faced them, not a naked man, roused, mazed, and unarmed out of a deep sleep to be butchered like a sheep, but a barbarian wide awake and at bay, partly armored and with his long sword at his hand. For an instant the tableau held the 4 rebel noblemen in the broken door, and the horde of wild, hairy faces crowding behind them, all held momentarily frozen by the sight of the blazing-eyed giant standing sword in hand in the middle of the candle-lighted chamber. In that instant, Escalante beheld On a small table near the royal couch, the silver scepter and the slender gold circlet, which was the crown of Aquilonia, and the sight maddened him with desire. "In, rogues!" yelled the outlaw. "He is 1 to 20 and he has no helmet." True, there had been lack of time to don the heavy plumed casque or to lace in place the side plates of the cuirass, nor was there now time to snatch the great shield from the wall. Still, Conan was better protected than any of his foes except Volmana and Grommel, who were in full armor. The king glared, puzzled as to their identity. Escalante he did not know. He could not see through the closed visors of the armored conspirators, and Ronaldo had pulled his slouch cap down above his eyes. But there was no time for surmise. With a yell that rang to the roof, the killers flooded into the room, Grommel first. He came like a charging bull, head down, sword low for the disemboweling thrust. Conan sprang to meet him, and all his tigerish strength went into the arm that swung the sword. In a whistling arc, the great blade flashed through the air and crashed on the Bostonian's helmet. Blade and casque shivered together, and Grommel rolled lifeless on the floor. Conan bounded back, still gripping the broken hilt. "Grommel," he spat, his eyes blazing in amazement as the shattered helmet disclosed the shattered head. Then the rest of the pack were upon him. A dagger point raked along his ribs between breastplate and backplate. A sword edge flashed before his eyes. He flung aside the dagger wielder with his left arm and smashed his broken hilt like a cestus into the swordman's temple. The man's brains spattered in his face. "Watch the door, 5 of you!" screamed Escalante, dancing about the edge of the singing steel whirlpool, for he feared that Conan might smash through their midst and escape. The rogues drew back momentarily as their leader seized several and thrust them toward the single door, and in that brief respite, Conan leaped to the wall and tore therefrom an ancient battle axe which, untouched by time, had hung there for half a century. With his back to the wall, he faced the closing ring for a flashing instant, then leaped into the thick of them. He was no defensive fighter. Even in the teeth of overwhelming odds, he always carried the war to the enemy. Any other man would have already died there, and Conan himself did not hope to survive, but he did ferociously wish to inflict as much damage as he could before he fell. His barbaric soul was ablaze, and the chants of old heroes were singing in his ears. As he sprang from the wall, his axe dropped an outlaw with a severed shoulder, and the terrible backhand return crushed the skull of another. Swords whined venomously about him, but death passed him by breathless margins. The Cimmerian moved in a blur of blinding speed. He was like a tiger among baboons as he leaped, sidestepped, and spun, offering an ever-moving target, while his axe wove a shining wheel of death about him. For a brief space, the assassins crowded him fiercely, raining blows blindly and hampered by their own numbers. Then they gave back suddenly. 2 corpses on the floor gave mute evidence of the king's fury, though Conan himself was bleeding from wounds on arm, neck, and legs. "Knaves!" screamed Ronaldo, dashing off his feathered cap, his wild eyes glaring. "Do ye shrink from the combat? Shall the despot live? Out on it!" He rushed in, hacking madly, but Conan, recognizing him, shattered his sword with a short, terrific chop and with a powerful push of his open hand, sent him reeling to the floor. The king took Escalante's point in his left arm, and the outlaw barely saved his life by ducking and springing backward from the swinging axe. Again the wolves swirled in, and Conan's axe sang and crushed. A hairy rascal stooped beneath its stroke and dived at the king's legs, but after wrestling for a brief instant at what seemed a solid iron tower, glanced up in time to see the axe falling, but not in time to avoid it. In the interim, one of his comrades lifted a broadsword with both hands and hewed through the king's left shoulder plate, wounding the shoulder beneath. In an instant, Conan's cuirass was full of blood. Volmana, flinging the attackers right and left in his savage impatience, came plowing through and hacked murderously at Conan's unprotected head. The king ducked deeply, and the sword shaved off a lock of his black hair as it whistled above him. Conan pivoted on his heel and struck him from the side. The axe crunched through the steel cuirass, and Volmana, crumpled with his whole left side caved in. "Volmana!" gasped Conan breathlessly. "I'll know that dwarf in hell." He straightened to meet the maddened rush of Ronaldo, who charged in wild and wide open, armed only with a dagger. Conan leaped back, lifting his axe. "Ronaldo!" His voice was strident with desperate urgency. "Back! I would not slay you." "Die, tyrant!" screamed the mad minstrel, hurling himself headlong on the king. Conan delayed the blow he was loath to deliver until it was too late. Only when he felt the bite of the steel in his unprotected side did he strike, in a frenzy of blind desperation. Ronaldo dropped with his skull shattered, and Conan reeled back against the wall, blood spurting Conan reeled back against the wall, blood spurting from between the fingers which gripped his wound. "In now and slay him!" yelled Escalante. Conan put his back against the wall and lifted his axe. He stood like an image of the unconquerable primordial, legs braced far apart, head thrust forward, one hand clutching the wall for support, the other gripping the axe on high, with the great corded muscles standing out in iron ridges, and his features frozen in a death snarl of fury, his eyes blazing terribly through the mist of blood which veiled them. The men faltered, wild, criminal, and dissolute though they were, yet they came of a breed men called civilized, with a civilized background. Here was the barbarian, the natural killer. They shrank back. The dying tiger could still deal death. Conan sensed their uncertainty and grinned mirthlessly and ferociously. "Who dies first?" he mumbled through smashed and bloody lips. Escalante leaped like a wolf, halted almost in midair with incredible quickness, and fell prostrate to avoid the death which was hissing toward him. He frantically whirled his feet out of the way and rolled clear as Conan recovered from his missed blow and struck again. This time the axe sank inches deep into the polished floor, close to Escalante's revolving legs. Another misguided desperado chose this instant to charge, followed half-heartedly by his fellows. He intended killing Conan before the Cimmerian could wrench his axe from the floor, but his judgment was faulty. The red axe lurched up and crashed down, and a crimson caricature of a man catapulted back against the legs of the attackers. At that instant, a fearful scream burst from the rogues at the door as a black, misshapen shadow fell across the wall. All but Ascalante wheeled at the cry, and then, howling like dogs, they burst blindly through the door in a raving, blaspheming mob and scattered through the corridors in screaming flight. Ascalante did not look toward the door. He had eyes only for the wounded king. He supposed the noise of the fray had at last roused the palace, and that the loyal guards were upon him, though even in that moment it seemed strange that his hardened rogues should scream so terribly in their flight. Conan did not look toward the door, because he was watching the outlaw with the burning eyes of a dying wolf. In this extremity, Ascalante's cynical philosophy did not desert him. And look at this crappy illustration. It's not very good. It's hideous. All seems to be lost, particularly honor, he murmured. However, the king is dying on his feet, and whatever other cogitation might have passed through his mind is not to be known. For leaving the sentence uncompleted, he ran lightly at Conan just as the Cimmerian was perforce employing his axe arm to wipe the blood from his blind eyes. That's a good place to stop. Thanks for listening.